Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to House Church. So glad to be hanging out with you for a few moments. So we are continuing our series called The Wonder Switch. And as you know, it's all about rediscovering or discovering the wonder of God. Today, we're going to talk for a few minutes about how God is our refuge. And I know that sounds obvious, but when we are in the middle of difficult times, it's kind of hard to know if we should keep going to God if things aren't getting any better. So that's kind of the headspace we're going to be in tonight. And in the weekend experience message, I talked about how in all of my wonder and splendor, I dropped my one and only child off of the changing table. And Nancy and I, we were terrified. He was bleeding. We didn't know what to do. It was the first time any of that had happened in our family. And so we rushed him over to Dr. Bobby's house, and it was there where we found relief. And in verbiage to stay consistent with this message, it's where we found refuge. It's where we found strength. That's where we found comfort, because we knew that we were in good hands. Psalms 46:1 tells us that God, He is our refuge and He is our strength. He's our ever-present help in time of trouble. In times of need, that's where we go to. But the question at hand is, what do you do when you go to God and God being your refuge, but He doesn't provide any relief? What do you do when you go to God in comfort, but He doesn't give you comfort? In other words, as you personally reflect, what do you do when God is not good enough? What do you do? Where do you go? Where do you turn? How is your relationship with God when you're going through something difficult and you keep going to Him, but the situation doesn't get better? So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be in Psalm 77, looking at a guy named Asaph. Asaph was the choir director for all of Israel. He made a living telling people about the wonder and goodness and greatness of God, but he has found himself in a wonderless situation. And he is trying to rediscover the wonder of God. And if we're honest with ourselves, or at least for me, this past year has stolen a lot of my wonder. And I am trying to rediscover the wonder of God. So let's rediscover it together. Psalm 77, we're going to start in verse 1. We're just going to check out a few verses and make a couple points along the way. Psalm 77, verse 1. Asaph says, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out my untiring arms, and I would not be comforted. He said, God, I remembered you, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. It was you that kept my eyes from closing. In other words, it was because of you that I'm not getting any relief, and I'm not getting any rest, any sleep. And he says, I was even too troubled to speak. In verse 5, I thought about the former days, the days of long ago. I remembered my song in the night, and my heart meditated on your spirit. Let's stop right there for just a second. What do you do when God is not good enough? You be honest with God and tell Him how you really feel. If I'm being honest with you, this is really difficult to do because God is holy. God is perfect. Scripture says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. We're supposed to honor God. And I got to tell you, I have some really dishonoring thoughts sometimes. I have some very unholy thoughts sometimes. But right here, we see through a godly man, a guy who wrote part of Scripture, that he shared his most unholy thoughts with God. And if he did it, then so should we. Continuing on, verse 7, he says, will the Lord reject forever? Will He never show His favor again? Has His unfailing love vanished? Has His promises failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? In His anger, has He withheld His compassion? Asaph's not in a good place, and he begins to question God. When we break up tonight and we have some group discussion, Be honest about the things that you've wanted to ask God, but maybe you felt like you shouldn't. Talk through that. Ask why, because it's when we ask, we discover and we find. Then things begin to shift for Asaph as he takes a step back and he remembers not just how God was faithful to him from time to time, but as he remembers how God has always been faithful. In verse 10, he says, "Then I thought, to this I will appeal, the years when the Most High stretched out his right hand." Verse 11, "I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago." He takes a moment to remember God's miracles. And in his remembering, he begins to find the wonder. Verse 15 says, "With your mighty arm, you redeemed the people, your descendants of Jacob and Joseph." Verse 19, it says, "Your path led through the sea, your way led through the waters." Verse 20, "You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron." What's he doing? He's remembering how God has not only been faithful to him in times, but God has a track record of faithfulness. God was faithful to people before Asaph was ever born and going through troubles. God was faithful to people before we ever came on this earth, before we ever went through difficult times. And when we seek to discover wonder, it's so imperative for you and I to take a step back and to broaden the scope and see how faithful God has been for generations and generations and generations. And it is in that remembering that we discover the wonder. I also want you to note that it says that God led his people through the sea. He didn't lead them around. And God, for whatever reason, he does not lead us through, or he doesn't lead us around problems. He leads us through them because he knows that as we go through it, we learn who to look to. And as we go through it, we learn and we grow and we mature and we develop. And it's in that we discover the wonder of our refuge. So thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you guys have a great time in your group discussion. Unpack this. Let's have some great conversations and let's together discover the wonder of God.